Chapter 12, in which Cimorene calls on a dragon and the Stone Prince discovers a plot. The shortcut to Roxim's worked just as well as Cimorene had hoped, and she even made up some of the time she had lost earlier. Roxim was in, too. She could hear the scraping of his scales as he moved around inside. She stepped up to the entrance of the cave and called, "Dragon Roxim!" Something round and shiny flew through the air, missing Cimorene by inches. It hit the wall of the tunnel with a loud clang and slid, rattling to the floor. Cimorene jumped. "Roxim!" she shouted at the top of her lungs. "What's this?" the dragon said, poking his nose out of the cave entrance. "I am Cimorene, princess to the dragon Kazul, and I offer you greetings and good fortune in all of your endeavors." Cimorene thought it was best to be particularly polite, in case Roxim were in a bad mood. She suspected he might be. In her experience, someone in a good mood did not throw things at visitors. "Very good," Roxim said. "Nice to see you again and all that, but I haven't got time for visitors at the moment, sorry." "I'm not a visitor, exactly. Kazul sent me with a message for you." "Oh, well, that's different. Just hand me that shield there, would you?" Cimorene picked up the shield from the floor of the tunnel. There was a large dent in one side where it had hit the wall, and several smaller ones over the rest of it from banging across things on its way to the tunnel floor. "You ought to be more careful," she said severely. "Just look at this." "Ha!" Roxim snorted, examining the dents. Shoddy work, that's the problem. In my day, you could roll a knight in full armor down the far side of the vanishing mountain and bounce him off 2 or 3 cliffs without so much as scratching his surface, much less denting it. This cheap modern stuff just doesn't hold up." "If you know it doesn't hold up, you shouldn't throw it around like that," Cimorene said. "You almost hit me." Roxim shifted uncomfortably. "Sorry. Didn't mean anything by it." "All right, but next time look before you throw things," Cimorene said, handing him the shield. "I always have this problem when I try and find something," Roxim confided. "Never know where to look. Gets frustrating, and the next thing you know, I'm pitching armor at the walls. Bad habit, but hard to break." "Maybe I could help," Cimorene suggested. "After I give you Kazul's message, that is." "Don't need help putting dents in things," Roxim said. "Comes to that, I don't really want it." "I didn't mean help throwing things," Cimorene said patiently. "I meant help finding whatever you're looking for." "Oh, well, come in then." Cimorene followed the dragon into a moderately large cave, similar to the one Kazul used as a living area. Roxim's cave, however, was full of clutter. Cimorene had to pick her way past bits of armor, 1/2 of a pair of bookends, a box of tea, a pink scroll, 3 mismatched kitchen pots, a small wooden statue, a broken flute, and 4 partially burned candles. Roxim walked straight over the mess as if it weren't there, squashing a mangy-looking stuffed pigeon and flattening a tin cup in passing. He dropped the shield on a pile of silk flowers and waved Cimorene to a seat on a large wooden chest near one wall. "Now, what's this message of Kazul's?" "It's about the wizards," Cimorene said, setting gingerly on a dusty surface of the chest. She made a mental note to find Roxim a nice princess as soon as she possibly could. "Eleonora and I found one of them picking Dragonsbane a few days ago, and Kazul thinks King Tokaz will listen to you if you tell him about it." "So that's where they got it," Roxim said in tones of disgust. "Pity you didn't mention it sooner." Cimorene got a sinking feeling. "What do you mean?" "Somebody poisoned King Tokaz this morning," Roxim explained. "Slipped some dragon's bane in his coffee. Fast acting, nothing to be done. Now we need a new king." "That's awful," Cimorene said. "Do you know who did it?" "Those dratted wizards, that's who," Roxim said angrily. "It's obvious. Stupid thing to do. Has to be a wizard's, by George. But Warag won't listen to me." "Warag? What's Wrede got to do with it? He's in charge of the investigation, Roxim replied, taking his time about it too, if you ask me. But if King was only poisoned this morning, what does that have to do with it? Roxim said unreasonably. Besides, if Wrede doesn't hurry, he won't have the culprit in hand by the time the trials start tomorrow. Trials? You mean with the Colin Stone, to choose the new king? Cimorene said with some hesitation. She did not see how it could be a trial for the person who had killed the king if he hadn't caught him yet, but she was still not completely certain that dragons didn't have some way of getting around the problem, and trying anyway. That's it, Roxim said, please. And before I leave, I have to find that emerald I picked up 50 years ago, coronation present for the new king. But you haven't gotten a new king yet, Cimorene said, feeling somewhat bewildered. And what if you're the new king? Roxim smiled broadly. Knew you were a nice gal, me the king. I rather like the idea. I still have to find the emerald, though. Wouldn't do to show up at the trials without a coronation present. Rum thing to do, overconfident. Though she was upset, and more than a little worried, Cimorene helped Roxim as best she could. After about an hour of poking through the clutter, Cimorene found the emerald wrapped in a gold-embroidered handkerchief and stuffed into the mouth of a large brass horn. Roxim thanked her and invited her to stay to tea, but Cimorene politely declined. She was eager to get back to Kazul and to tell her what happened and decide what to do next. Cimorene hurried back to Kazul's cave by the shortest route, thinking so hard about Tokaz's death that she forgot about everything else. She found Kazul sleeping and was forced to wake her despite her worries about the dragon's health. She knew Kazul would want to hear about the king of the dragons as soon as possible, and she wanted to hear what Kazul made of Wrede's involvement in the investigation. Back already, Kazul said, opening her eyes. Didn't Roxim get you in to see King Tokaz? No, Cimorene said. She hesitated, uncertain of the best way to break the news. It was too late. Too late? Kazul raised her head, startled. She eyed Cimorene briefly, and then said, All right, let's have it. What's happened? King Tokaz was poisoned this morning. Roxim said somebody put dragon's bane in his coffee. Kazul snorted. Somebody knew Tokaz pretty well. Seeing Cimorene's surprised expression, she explained, Tokaz drank Turkish coffee every morning. The stuff is strong enough to take the roof off your mouth. It's why no one ever went to talk to him over breakfast. You could boil a whole field's worth of dragon's brain in Turkish coffee without changing the taste enough for anyone to notice, or the texture. Cimorene tried to imagine coffee, even Turkish coffee, strong enough to take the roof off a dragon's mouth and failed. I told Roxim about the wizard Eleonora and I met, and Roxim said I ought to tell Wrede because Wrede is in charge of finding the poisoner, she said. But when you caught Antarella picking dragon's bane, he thought Wrede sent you, Kazul said. If Wrede's mixed up with wizard... She broke off, coughing. Cimorene watched her anxiously, but this coughing spasm did not last long. I don't like this, Kazul finished when she got her breath back. I don't either, Cimorene agreed. But what can we do about it? Kazul frowned and said nothing. For several minutes, the two sat and thought in silence. Then Kazul said, We can't do anything until the new king has been chosen. Did Roxim say when testing will be? Tomorrow, Cimorene said. Tomorrow? Kazul surged to her feet. Why didn't you say so at once? If I'm to be at the ford of Whispering Snakes tomorrow, I'll have to... Lie down, Cimorene commanded. Kazul looked at her in surprise and collapsed in another fit of coughing. Cimorene waited until the dragon's coughing had subsided and then said sternly, You're in no condition to go hauling rocks over the countryside. I'd be surprised if you can even fly as far as end of the pass. I think you're going to have to give up on the trials this time around. Kazul made a choking noise. Cimorene looked at her in alarm and then realized the dragon was laughing. "It's not optional, princess," Kazul said. "All the adult dragons in the Mountains of Mourning are required to show up, no matter what condition they're in. But there is no excuse for missing the testing of a new king," Kazul repeated. "None. And I have a great deal to do before I leave. So if anything needs to be done around here, I'll do it," Cimorene said firmly. "If you don't rest, you won't be able to fly at all. And then how will you get to the fjord?" "A reasonable point," Kazul said, settling reluctantly back into place. "Very well. The first thing I need is a coronation present for the new king. There's a jeweled helmet on a shelf in the second storeroom that might do. Bring it out so I can take a look at it." Cimorene spent the rest of the evening running errands for Kazul. Besides choosing a coronation gift, Kazul rejected the helmet and 2 crowns before deciding on a scepter made of gold and crystal. Innumerable messages had to be delivered to various dragons who were in charge of their arranging the trials. This one had to be informed of Kazul's ill health, so that it could be taken into account when the order of the testing was established. That one had to be told that Kazul would not be able to join the coronation procession. Substitutes had to be found to perform Kazul's various ceremonial duties, and their names had to be approved by a surly dragon in charge of protocol. And finally, the substitutions had to be recorded on all the lists of the dragons who were managing each of the events. It reminded Cimorene strongly of Linderwall and her parents' court. By the time the last arrangement had been made and the last message delivered, it was very late, and Cimorene was exhausted. She was also very glad she had not let Kazul do all the running around. The dragon, who had slept most of the time Cimorene was out, was looking much better, even in the dim light of Cimorene's lamp. Tired but satisfied, Cimorene went to her room and dropped into bed. Cimorene was up early the next morning, stirring a dozen ostrich eggs in a large iron kettle for Kazul's breakfast. Kazul ate all of them, and then slid out of the cave and prepared to leave for the ford of Whispering Snakes. "Don't fret, princess," Kazul said. "The testing doesn't stop till 10. I have plenty of time to get there, even if I stop and rest now and then." Her voice sounded much better than it had the day before, and it no longer seemed to rasp in her throat. "While I'm gone, why don't you visit Warag's princess? See if she's noticed anything odd these past few days. We need to know as much as we can before we talk to the new king about Warag and the wizards." "All right," Cimorene said, "as soon as I'm done with the dishes." Kazul turned and leapt into the air, her wings churning clouds of dust from the dry surface on the ground. Cimorene squinted after her and shouted, "Good luck!" Kazul's wings dipped in answer before the dragon soared out of sight behind the shoulder of the next mountain. Cimorene stood looking after Kazul, her forehead wrinkling in worry. After a moment she shook herself and went inside. She had work to do. Washing the dishes did not take long, and as soon as she was done, Cimorene set off to visit Eleonora. The tunnels and passages were silent and empty, and Cimorene's footsteps echoed eerily through the darkness. She began to wish she had taken the longer route outside of the mountain. She had not realized that the dragon city would seem so strange and lifeless with all the dragons gone. "Psst! Cimorene!" Cimorene jumped. She whirled in the direction of the voice, raising her lamp like a club, and Eleonora stepped out of the adjoining tunnel and into the circle of light. In one hand she clutched a large bucket, 3/4 full of soapy water, and she looked rather pale. "Eleonora," Cimorene said, lowering her arm, "what are you doing out here?" "Shh," Eleonora said. She looked nervously over her shoulder. "Warag told me to scrub off the table in the banquet room while everyone was away, and I heard someone moving around in there, even though everyone but us is gone, and I dropped my lamp and—" "Oh, my goodness," Cimorene said. "The Stone Prince! I had forgotten all about him." "Who?" "The Stone Prince." Quickly, Cimorene explained how she had found him and hidden him the day before, and I hadn't thought about it until now, but this is the perfect time to go and get him out of the mountains, she finished. All of the dragons are gone, and no one will see him. Come on, before I forget again. Eleonora now nodded dubiously, and the two girls headed for the banquet room. When they arrived, Cimorene went in first, holding her lamp high. Prince, she called, are you there? It's me, Cimorene. Yes, I'm here, said the stone prince, unfolding stiffly from a gray lump in the corner. I'm glad you're back. Who's this you've brought with you? Princess Eleonora of the Duchy of Toronmarsh, Cimorene said. She's the princess of the dragon Wrede just now. Does her father need a great service done for him? The prince asked, hopefully. Not that I know of, Cimorene replied, unless you're good at getting rid of aunts, but that would be rather more of a service to Eleonora than to her father. I can think of nothing that would make me happier, the prince said, with evident admiration, as he bowed stiffly to Eleonora. Good afternoon, princess, or should it be good evening? It's hard to tell without windows. Eleonora blushed and looked down at her bucket without answering. Actually, it's good morning, Cimorene told the prince. I'm sorry it took me so long to come back for you, but, well, a lot has been going on. Eleonora looked up sharp. You've been sitting in the dark all night? She shuddered. You could have at least left him a candle, Cimorene. Thank you for your thought, Princess Eleonora, but it's just as well she didn't, the stone prince said. If I'd been sitting here with a candle lit, they'd have noticed me right away. And an unlit candle isn't much use in the dark, is it? What do you mean? Cimorene said. Who would have noticed you? The dragon and the two men he was talking to, replied the prince. I think they were wizards. What? Said Cimorene and Eleonora together. Well, they talked as if they were wizards, the prince said. They weren't carrying staffs, though. What did they look like? Cimorene said. They were both tall, and they both had beards. The older one's was gray, and the younger one's was brown. Antarel and Zeminar, Cimorene said. And they were talking to a dragon? The prince nodded. Then they wouldn't have been carrying their staffs. Dragons are allergic to them. Did you hear what they said? Something about a contest, the prince said. The wizards were going to fix it so this dragon would win. It sounded like a cross-country race, and the wizards were going to hide along the path and help the dragon out somehow. I'm afraid I'm not very clear about that part. Spells aren't my specialty. I'm much better at hopeless causes. Eleonora and Cimorene exchanged appalled glances. The trials with Collinstone to pick the new king, Eleonora said. Which dragon? Cimorene asked urgently. Do you know which dragon they were talking to? I only heard the name once, the prince said. He sounded apologetic and a little embarrassed, and I don't think I got it right. It sounded too silly. Tell us, Cimorene commanded. Well, it sounded like warthog, the prince said, in an even more apologetic tone than before. Could it have been Warag? Cimorene asked. That's it, the prince said. I knew it couldn't really have been warthog. What a pity you remembered, said a voice from the entrance into the banquet hall. Cimorene whirled. Antarel stood in the doorway, staff in hand, watching them with an intolerably smug expression.